And we are live. Good morning. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. It's been a while since we've hosted one of these live sessions, and a lot has happened since. Whether you're a consumer, an analyst, a C-suite decision maker, or involved in a technical role, it's impossible not to be aware of the seismic shifts taking place across our workplaces and centers of economy today. Now, a lot of organizations are struggling to adjust to this new normal, for good reason. While others have leveraged the opportunity to strengthen their processes and plug up areas of risk in order to build a more sustainable operating model that will see them through the pandemic and beyond. Inevitably, the companies that are most successful over this period will be those that can anticipate the needs of their core customers and build products and services to match. Of course, this kind of outward-in thinking isn't just a product of COVID-19. It's a reality that businesses have been grappling with for the best part of a decade now. Go back to 2017 and you'll see a plethora of studies showing that the two biggest challenges faced by organizations today are meeting customer expectations and reacting appropriately to shifts in market demand. For the most part, we've seen businesses respond to these challenges by implementing varying levels of digital transformation across their front and back-end processes. Now, that can mean anything from setting up ERP and WMS systems within their supply chain functions to using social media and mobile applications to engage digital audiences. But as you'll soon learn, technology alone is not the competitive differentiator that most businesses believe it to be. But before we get into that, let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Adnan Khan, and I handle product marketing here at Astera, which means that I help to put together and publish many of the white papers, blogs, and support articles you can find on our website. Handling Q&A today will be our COO, Jay Mishra. Jay has over a decade's worth of experience helping clients across an array of industries implement data-driven processes across their enterprise. So he's ideally placed to see how these changes have enabled better customer understanding. There's also a little bit of housekeeping that we need to get out of the way. First, this conversation is being recorded and the footage will be made available on BrightTalk as well as on our website at astera.com. So if you miss anything, you can always go back and catch it again later. Second, while we will be looking to cover the 360 data architecture in as much depth as possible during this webinar, I'm sure many of you will have questions of your own. So just make sure to type them into the chat box and Jay will try to get to as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation. So let's start things off with the first poll question of this webinar, which relates directly back to our opening thesis statement. The question is, how is your organization working to anticipate changes in its market and customers? So let me go ahead and open the voting on that poll. So do you collect and consolidate insights from various touch points, use them to drive reporting and analysis? That's a pretty normal system there. Do you rely on experience and intuition of key members of your management and C-suite to drive those type of strategic decisions? Again, I think gut instinct will always have a place within organizations. Do you review customer feedback on an ad hoc basis and work on the most frequently mentioned complaints and requests? So maybe more of a informal system there. Or do you work on producing the best quality product possible and assume your customers value the same things you do? So we're talking about outside in, this is more the inside out method where you work really hard on product quality and then if you build it, they will come. So which of those processes aligns most closely with your organization is the question. I'm going to give about 5 seconds more to see this poll through. And so far, I think it's 50-50 split. Let's end things there. So yeah, we got a 50% split on collecting, consolidating the insights from various touch points. So some of our viewers prefer that approach, and some prefer to work on that informal approach of implementing changes based on customer feedback as and when resources allow. Great. Right, let's go ahead and move on. So let's assume you work for a company that's actively looking to implement data-driven processes that allow it to stay one step ahead of the market trends. As we said, for many, that means jumping straight to new technology. Now, while these investments may help establish your brand amongst the growing stable of forward-thinking organizations, they can only produce lasting ROI when accompanied by a comprehensive reporting and analytics framework. The best example of this are industry leaders. I mean, you've all heard of the company names, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, and Google. Sure, each of these organizations boasts an enviable technology stack and cream of the crop technical resources, But these assets are not the end goal in and of themselves. No, what defines the so-called FANG fraternity is their near obsessive dedication to understanding their users and creating personalized offerings that seamlessly meet every individual at their level of engagement. Each one of these companies has an unparalleled reporting and analytics structure that draws data from varied sources, both within and outside the organization. So they're looking at real-time user behaviors tracked through website analytics, in-depth customer profiles and purchasing histories gathered from CRM systems, sentiment analyses drawn from customer service channels and review aggregators, and so much more. Now, all of this information is used to drive end-to-end customer experiences that start long before you even think of making a purchase. Of course, creating this kind of architecture is easier said than done. In fact, if you take a look at the majority of companies, they still leave their critical insights hidden behind siloed systems that are only accessible to specific departments. So to create cohesive business strategies that translate across multiple channels, businesses need to consolidate their disparate data sets and move them into a centralized system that can provide a complete view of customer behavior across all targeted market segments. So traditionally, these objectives have been served through something called a system of records, or SOR. This architecture served as a hub for all data relating to a specific business function. Once collected, inputs were consolidated to provide a more insightful look into the related process. Now, the problem there is that the SOR of old was often limited to a single platform. So you've got Salesforce for sales data, you've got HubSpot for your marketing information, you've got 3PL for your logistics and supply chain, etc. While accurate, the picture provided by these systems often lacked greater business context. As a result, a far more holistic approach was required to create a 360-degree view of enterprise data that would lead to more informed, timely, and contextually relevant business decisions. At the heart of this view is something called the golden record. Now, a golden record consists of cleansed, validated, and aggregated data collected from disparate platforms, both within and outside the enterprise. Data extraction from each of these sources is automated to ensure minimum lag time between the receipt of information into each operational store and its delivery into a consolidated structure for reporting and analysis. So this is all coming together to create something called a 360-degree view. Ultimately, the 360-degree view acts as a single source of truth that offers significant advantages over the traditional SOR. First, it matches data from different sources and removes duplicated and contradictory records so that a definitive customer profile is available for decision makers across the enterprise. Second, the 360 view is time sensitive and touchpoint sensitive. It provides an account of when and how customers interact with their brand, which channels they prefer to use, where their last known engagement occurred. With this information at hand, organizations can build a complete map of their buyer's journey. As new data filters in from each source platform, it is updated dynamically in the 360 view. So the reporting and analysis is always as current as possible from every possible perspective. The 360 view encompasses external data, such as market trends, third-party reports, and public statistics, to supplement internal data. These inputs provide greater context for the split-second of operational decisions and help organizations create mid to long-term strategic plans with far greater certainty. In uncertain times, certainty is really a great commodity to have. Finally, a 360-degree architecture is designed for enterprise-wide accessibility. It enables workforces to derive insights from data based on each employee's specific concerns. So while a salesperson and accountant might have different objectives, they can interact with the 360-degree architecture and uncover insights that are relevant to their needs. So now that we've introduced the 360 view, I'm curious to see how our audience feels they can benefit from this kind of framework. With that in mind, here's our second poll question of the day. I'm going to go ahead and open that up for voting. The question is, which of your functions could benefit most from a 360-degree view? Is it marketing? 360 view could help you push relevant content and advertising to targeted segments. Is it sales? It could improve lead conversions, reduce time spent on poor prospects. Production? It can help you tailor production to demand, minimize wastage. Maybe finance and accounting, where you get to minimize spending on less effective front-end processes based on the data you have. Or is it logistics, where you get to use your 360 view to improve delivery and fulfillment services according to real-time feedback that you receive? So I'm going to keep this question open for about 20 seconds more because I really want to find out how the 360 view can be employed in different organizations and different industries. Marketing is an obvious function and sales wherever customer data is concerned, but really customer insights can drive efficiency, ROI, and value ultimately across every function that you have in your organization. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop voting there, and it seems pretty much everyone agrees with me. I'm going to stop voting there, and everybody agrees with me on that. It's marketing. 100% of our viewers agree that marketing is probably the best utilization of the 360 view. Great. All right. So for those of you that are still on the fence about the practical utility of the 360 view, let's go ahead and see how this data architecture is being developed and applied in real-world scenarios. For this particular webinar, we're going to be focusing on how the auto insurance industry utilizes 360-degree data integration. So over the past decade, auto insurance has been at the forefront of the shift towards customer centricity, with companies like Geico and Allstate working to, just a moment, with companies like Geico and Allstate working to implement this type of view across their organization. There we go. The former in particular has built an unassailable position through smart marketing campaigns and self-service purchasing models that enable customers to buy, upgrade, or cancel their policies with ease. Thanks to these innovations, customers are now more than willing to compare their current premiums on an ongoing basis and switch to rival service providers wherever they think they can get a better deal. Now, data lies at the heart of Geico's dominant business model. The company utilizes a 360 view of customer data to add value to various areas of their operation. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of those. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is underwriting, and when you talk about insurance, underwriting is pretty much the next follow-up. Insurance companies have long employed actuaries to examine internal data on claim filings and policy histories to determine things like average premiums, policy guidelines, and payouts for each policy type. But these inputs have generally been limited to historical records. The advent of big data has brought an explosion in the sources available to insurers. With a 360-degree view of data at their fingertips, analysts can collect data from a far greater array of inputs. These include external credit reports, real-time quotations from online channels, telematics data from IoT devices. This is getting really big, especially in the trucking industry. Demographic data collected from analytics tools, national statistics on car accidents, and safety ratings. Once extracted, cleansed, and merged with internal data, these data sets provide a basis for far more dynamic policies that adjust in real time to factors such as the client's previous driving history, their occupation, the type of car they drive, and the area they reside in. In some cases, this information can even result in outright denial of an insurance application based on the applicant's risk profile. Second one up is marketing and sales. So we touched on this before. By analyzing customer behavior across online and offline touchpoints, insurance companies can gain insights into how their target segments prefer to be reached, what type of offerings they gravitate towards, and the type of messaging that engages them best. These insights can improve marketing activities in a number of key areas. So first of all, the cost of acquiring customers is reduced, as sales teams will no longer have to spend time chasing cold leads. Instead, they can interact with customers at the most optimal time through the best channels available. In many cases, customers may prefer to sign up for insurance themselves using online touchpoints, which drastically reduces the sales cycle and related costs. So again, by looking at trends on social media, call logs, and customer feedback, marketing teams can figure out which information is most important to audiences and adjust the overall user experience to reflect those concerns. This will aid customer retention and maximize conversions. So if you talk about looking at customer feedback on an ad hoc basis, when you have it ready for you in a consolidated way using a 360 view, that's really going to help you create formalized processes around it. Third up in the marketing and sales function, customers that are at risk of switching can be identified early to the volume of customer service interactions and complaints. These individuals can then be targeted proactively to ensure retention. Really, retaining customers is pretty much biggest preoccupation for a lot of organizations right now. And if you can make a significant dent on churn rate in advance, then that's really value adding. Ultimately, more customer data will feed into design of insurance products, ensuring that these are tailored to the exact desires of each targeted segment. So we already talked about how organizations that still prefer that product-first approach, the Customer 360 is there to help you there as well. Finally, let's go to fraud detection. By integrating external data into their Customer 360, insurers can create automated verification processes for all clients, whereby their details are matched against those provided in things like credit reports. Similarly, social media profiles and other publicly available information from the time of claim filing can be parsed, extracted, and analyzed to determine whether a pattern of suspicious behavior is evident. These insights can be combined with details from previous customer payouts in order to build a complete view of each claimant's reliability. So ultimately, the biggest obstacle to creating the 360 view isn't data extraction from disparate sources, but the subsequent validation and cleansing of data, or even consolidation in an accessible repository. It's the time, resources, and expertise required to design and deploy these processes from start to finish. Here are just some of the challenges that can arise during a manual implementation. So I think we've lost a slide for that earlier, but we'll go ahead and post that later so you can look at the slide in more detail. Here are just some of the challenges that can arise during the manual implementation. Each siloed system will house data in a unique format and layout, connecting to these sources, and linking extracted data sets with those from other functions requires a considerable amount of technical skill. A data steward will need to be appointed to oversee transfer of data in line with applicable governance policies. Processes will need to be put in place to ensure updates and changes to source systems are transferred to the 360 view as quickly as possible, otherwise records will become outdated. Again, this will require significant intervention from your IT team. Data may be duplicated in different organizational silos, really common, and there could be inconsistencies in how these records are presented and formatted. In these cases, the master record will need to be identified, and missing or erroneous entries will need to be removed. Last of all, the timeliness of data may differ from system to system, which will hamper the accuracy of the 360 view. So duration of updates for each silo will need to be verified, and these details will need to be accounted for when designing manual integration flows. To me, all that adds up to a lot of work, a lot of utilization of resources, a lot of time, and ultimately a lot of expenditure. The best way to overcome these issues is to leverage an enterprise data integration solution like Astera Enterprise to support each aspect of your customer 360. Now, that's going to lead us directly into our use case, but before we jump in, I'd like to circle back and find out how your organization deals with the challenges that come with building and maintaining a structure for reporting and analytics. So here's our third and final poll question of the day. And I'm going to go ahead and start voting on this. The question is, how does your organization build and maintain its reporting and analytics infrastructure? So first option here, we have manual processes in place to collect, validate, and aggregate data from different sources. Reports are generated by team members after integration, so a completely manual process. We talked about the challenges that come with that a little earlier, but so a lot of organizations prefer to keep things in-house. Second up, we automate data collection, validation, and aggregation. Relevant team members analyze these inputs and prepare the necessary reports. So some automation there, but not quite an end-to-end data pipeline. Finally, we have an end-to-end system in place that encompasses data integration from across the enterprise, subsequent recordings automated through real-time dashboards. So a complete end-to-end data pipeline, what we're talking about, and what our use case will concern as well. If you're not seeing the voting, you can go ahead and switch to the voting screen to see that, if it's not available on your screen. I'm going to keep this open for about 10 more seconds to get a few more replies. So far, it's looking like the in-house manual approach is the way most people are trending. Okay, we got a little bit of movement there on the voting, and I'll go ahead and end it there. So still, a majority still trusting those manual processes. Perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and see how our use case specific company dealt with those manual challenges on their end. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our hypothetical company here. It's called GuardDrive. So the type of data architecture we're going to be building in this use case is an automated data pipeline that provides a comprehensive real-time view of customer data. And the company that involves is an auto insurance provider called GuardDrive. GuardDrive is a Missouri-based auto insurance provider that has served customers across the United States for well over 50 years. Over that time, the company has risen from a small policyholder-owned mutual fund offering a single insurance product to a nationally established organization that sells to corporations, families, and individuals throughout the country. A big part of GuardDrive's success over the years has been built on a massive network of brokers, agents, and commercial insurance processors that are responsible for selling policies and providing ongoing correspondence with claimants in a number of regions. This approach has proved highly effective in the past, and the company currently holds policies for 3 million plus customers. GuardDrive's underwriters currently operate on a traditional risk mitigation model, wherein profitability is maintained by ensuring that the overall pool of customers contains a far greater proportion of safe drivers that pay their premiums regularly and rarely file claims versus the segment of high-risk drivers that are responsible for the vast majority of payouts. So if you're ever wondering what goes into calculating your insurance premiums, this is a big part of that calculation. Now, to maintain this optimal balance, actuaries routinely review the company's incident reports, claim histories, and customer profiles, adjusting premiums and payouts based on their findings. However, these tried and tested methods have begun to show some cracks in recent years. A number of smaller data-driven competitors have begun to pick up traction amongst the new generation of auto insurance customers and that key 18 to 36 demographic. Now, these businesses operate on a direct-to-consumer model in which they communicate and sell directly to consumers through multiple channels, including telephone, web, and mobile applications. This ability to meet potential buyers on their terms is facilitated by data-driven strategies that extend underwriting past just analysis of structured internal data to insight source from a variety of areas, including social media, local highway statistics, telematics devices, and credit reports. Backed by this intelligent data architecture, these so-called insurtechs have been able to create extremely price-sensitive offerings that are tailored to the specific needs of each customer segment. What's more, products can be purchased directly through self-service channels without the need for any intermediary involvement. Now, obviously, that creates a problem for GuardDrive. So let's investigate that problem a little bit deeper. So GuardDrive has made significant strides towards digital transformation over the past decade by investing in several front-end applications that will be able to provide a more accessible reporting system for decision makers across different departments. While these platforms do make data more readily available to agents, underwriters, and marketers, they're still backed by decades-old mainframe systems. GuardDrive's legacy systems were built to handle the sort of high-volume transactional updates usually created by claim filers, but they're far less adept at carrying out any sort of complex analysis, which is really what you want from a reporting and analytics framework. So their hardware uses a variety of older programming languages like COBOL, and it's maintained by a dwindling pool of IT resources who actually have the technical expertise to handle such formats. Now, due to the inflexible nature of this architecture, porting to front-end applications requires middleware, which introduces additional limitations, and as a result, users often have to manually transfer data from legacy sources to their front-end applications. Duplications errors are common, and user data is often outdated. This patchwork system of mainframes, middleware, modern applications is extremely fragmented, and communication between departmental systems is sporadic at best. That means the critical insights are often confined to a department unless specifically extracted and consolidated. Of course, integrating such a complex internal data architecture with any sort of external sources would require substantial investment, as there's currently no facility in place to handle APIs and real-time updates. Although some members of GuardDrive's board have suggested a wholesale rip and replace strategy that would see the company's existing hardware upgraded to a more modern distributed architecture, such an implementation would be extremely costly and time-intensive. Once started, the project would need to be seen through to conclusion, which might be several years on from inception. Plus, even if such a migration were to take place, there is no guarantee that it would be effective in the long run. Despite the limitations of mainframes, there is no doubt that they're ideally suited to handling the day-to-day tasks of transaction processing. So just getting rid of them wholesale, probably not the best option, especially in the short term. Let's take a look at what GuardDrive needs. So GuardDrive needs a solution that can help them automate and optimize data transfer from legacy sources. Currently, the company has a whole team dedicated to scanning through OLTP archives and identifying records that need to be updated, corrected, or entered in front-end applications. A new solution should be able to perform such tasks with minimum oversight. Second, they need a scalable data management system that is able to integrate data from existing and new sources, including unstructured data and external applications, validate those inputs, and consolidate them for viewing, reporting, and analysis. Third, they need the ability to search through their consolidated data architecture to produce meaningful insights that can drive real-time decision-making across key functions such as marketing, sales, and underwriting. Finally, they need a way to quickly deliver cross-enterprise data to relevant functions with respect to things like data security and governance. Again, I think the slide for that was left back there, but when we go ahead and post this slideshow up for later viewing, you can go ahead and see those in order. So let's get to designing a solution. Obviously, we're going to be using Astera Enterprise for this. Just a brief introduction here. Astera Enterprise is an end-to-end data integration solution that can comprehensively handle guardrails requirements. Due to the scale and complexity of the organization's data challenges, several different features will need to be deployed to create the sort of end-to-end processes they need and to create that ever-elusive 360 view. So I'm going to go ahead and shift over to the product now to show you how this end-to-end data pipeline is going to be built in our product and show you some different aspects of it. Now, one of the biggest aspects of this use case is going to be identifying appropriate sources from both within and without the enterprise. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those. So the first data set we're going to be looking at is obviously coming from GuardDrive's OLTP, their transactional system, which in this case is a mainframe. Now, this is ideally suited to handling the type of volume that GuardDrive is processing. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of claims filed per day. They're a national insurance provider. But obviously, when you need to handle higher level analysis, then it's not the best place to go. That's when you need the 360 view. In this case, we've created a subsection of data from that their OLTP and used an Excel workbook source. GuardDrive themselves will probably use a COBOL source to extract data from their mainframes, either to be done just as easily configured within a few steps. Next, obviously, we need to apply some of those higher level aggregates and calculations to get data in a better format for reporting and analysis. So the first thing we're going to do here is create an expression to validate which cars involved in claims are older than 5 years, which ones are newer than 5 years. Obviously, we'd expect cars that are older than 5 years to be involved in more accidents, but we'll see if the data bears that out. So you can see the expression applied here, and our data is passed on as follows. Once the data is passed on, we apply an aggregate to count the number of vehicles on a state-by-state basis. So those older than 5 years and those newer than 5 years. We go ahead and join those up into a report. And let's take a look at some of the other aggregations that we've performed. So policy type, this is another really important data point to look at. Is it a corporate policy? Is it an individual policy? Is it a family policy? And which of these results in the highest number of claims? If you go ahead and preview the output here, we can take a look at that. So in the state of Iowa, just based on a small cross-section of records, we have 5 claims filed on corporate auto policies, 9 on personal policies, and 1 on special auto policies. As you can see, this data is arriving in sort of a hierarchical format. We want it to be grouped by state. So we're going to apply a denormalize transformation here to sort of flatten that data out and get rid of the redundant rows, redundant columns rather, and get them into a better format for our end database. Some of the other aggregates we've applied here are account on vehicle size. So is a medium-sized car more likely to be involved in a claim? Is a large-sized car more likely to be involved in a claim? Information like this is really going to help us fine-tune our underwriting on GuardDrive's end. Another key data set here, location code is another field. So are accidents more likely to occur in suburban areas or rural areas within a state? As you can see here, we've got data coming in a similar format as it was for the previous count, so we've applied another denormalize. And finally, another key data set that I want to talk about is average claim amount. So how much payouts are we paying out for different states? As we're going to see later on, we can compare this information to externally sourced data to see how GuardDrive's payouts compare to the industry at large on a state-by-state basis. And if there's a difference there, then that might mean, making some changes to guidelines on policy payouts, especially on a state-by-state basis. We've got some demographic information here, average income. Does income have any sort of correlation with claim payouts? Obviously, if you look at data sets in isolation, 1,000 records, maybe even 10,000 records, you might not see the trends you want to see. But we're talking about high volumes of claim filings on a daily basis. And over time, GuardDrive will start to see some patterns develop in at least some of these areas. So once we've joined all these data sets based on the state ID, we create a consolidated report and we forward that to our Customer 360 database. So we used SQL Server to build this Customer 360 view, but we offer a range of databases or support a range of databases that you can use as your destination. Just to take a look at some of them, you've got SQL Server, you've got Oracle, Amazon Redshift, MariaDB. So really, you can use a destination of your choice, whatever you feel comfortable with. Alternatively, you can also just send these consolidated data sets all the way over to your reporting and analytics applications. So Power BI and Tableau are two applications that we support natively. You can also use our REST API client to connect to an application of your choice. So these are all options available to you. Let's move ahead to our next data set. It's going to be another internal data set, which is our insurance marketing information. So when it comes to insurance marketing, we're really looking to add further context to each incident. Obviously, we got a lot of great incident details from the OLTP database. We found out how much we're paying out in injury claims, property claims, vehicle claims, where and how accidents occurred. But we want to find out who was involved in the accidents. We want to find out how old they were, how long they've been our customers, what their hobbies are, what their marital status is. These sorts of demographic details are really going to help us fine-tune underwriting, fine-tune marketing, and fine-tune sales. So that's the sort of information the demographic data sets are really going to help with. We've created a join here based on the customer ID field. That's one shared by both of our sources. And then we've gone ahead and applied our aggregate. So as I mentioned, age, a key detail here. What's the average age for claim filers in different states? Average policy premium. So again, this is something that will be compared to our external data sets. Is how much we're charging for policy premiums per state the same as other companies in the industry are charging, or do they differ, and why? This might be normal. It might be because our customer profile is different from the industry at large, but this is the type of things that you need to explore, and you need context to explore that. Okay, so moving on, you can see count of educational level. Does educational level have any sort of correlation with the claims filed? On the surface of it, it might not seem so, but as you bring together data, as you get more volume of data, then you might start to see some patterns emerge. And generally, I think with most of these data points, as long as there's significant variation and enough data coming in, you do start to see some sort of correlation. So again, with the count of educational level, you can see that the data is arriving in a hierarchical format. You have multiple redundant rows or columns. So we've denormalized it, flattened it out, created joint reports, consolidated them using the joint transformation, and fed them into our Customer 360 database. All right, so now let's start to look more externally. And we'll start doing that with this data set here, which is the customer credit risk data set. Now, I talked earlier about fraud detection and how that's a key use case for the Customer 360 view. Of course, the problem that comes with getting good credit risk information or credit detail on your clients is where to source that from. So in this case, GuardDrive happens to be owned by a larger conglomerate that also owns a financial services provider that happens to service many of GuardDrive's existing clients. So they've been able to source data from this sister concern and find out things like when the last delinquent payment was for these customers. Are they homeowners or not? How much are they paying in installments? What is their overall loan amount? Right now, we've brought this data in a delimited format, but you can use database source, you can use an Excel workbook source as we've shown, email source. Really, you can configure any source in exactly the same way, extract data from it with ease. So once we gone ahead and found a way to match these two data sets, we did so using the customer ID field, which is the naming convention we use in our own data set. The external data set coming in used the ID naming convention. We've matched them using something called a file lookup, and then use that matched ID to create a joint report with data coming in from both of those sources. Fed that into consolidated report, and finally into our Customer 360 database view. Okay, so that's our sister concern, but let's look even wider into some accident statistics that are sourced from the National Highway Association. So these are really going to help provide further context to our internal incident statistics. So we know how many claims were filed internally, we know the profile of claims that were filed internally, how they happened, where they occurred, but does that correlate with the industry at large, with accidents occurring across the nation at large? So there's two data sets that we've used for this. This is the damages data set. Basically, this tells us where damages are occurring on a vehicle. That might sound a little convoluted, but let me talk you through the data flow, and you'll get a better idea of why we're using this data set. So the first thing we're going to do is apply another lookup here to match the naming conventions. In the incoming data set, they've used ST case coding to basically define their states. We use just a state description in our internal data set, or rather GuardDrive does. So we've gone ahead and created that match using the lookup, and then we used an expression to apply the join of the ID in both of those source files, and then we've passed it on and applied some aggregates. So the aggregate we applied here is really to see where damage occurs most in cars, and there's various areas that damage can occur, and in this incoming data set, they've been codified and sorted. So some of the areas that you'll see, if we preview the output here, are at the clock point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, according to demarcation of the clock. At the top of the car, the undercarriage on the left, and so on and so forth. This helps us know whether the details on internal claim filings correspond to what we know about how accidents occur in the nation at large, and also helps us know how severity can be calculated for accidents and sort of adjust our insurance premiums accordingly. Again, these data sets are going to be really helpful to provide context to our internal data. The second data set we're going to look at is this vehicle data set. As you can see, this is a pretty big data set. What we're doing here basically is seeing information on vehicles involved in accidents across the nation and how that corresponds to our own internal data. So again, we've matched the ST case coding to our state descriptions in order to create a join between these two data sets and make them applicable to our internal data. And then we've applied a number of aggregates. So some of the things we're calculating here are the count of vehicle owners. So are vehicles involved in an accident owned by the person driving the car? Are they owned by someone else? What's the likelihood of that? These sorts of details are being revealed through this data set. The manner of collision, again, going to help us identify whether claim filings are legitimate and the severity of internal claims versus national statistics. This is one that we've already correlated in our insurance claims data flow. The count of vehicles not older than 5 years and their regularity of being involved in accidents. This is a key field that we can compare to our internal data to create that customer 360 view. Average number of vehicles involved in an accident, again, claim details involved in our incident claim filings are going to be correlated against that. Average number of occupants. All this data is going to help us get more insights from our internal data sets. And again, same process, applying joins based on that state ID field and creating a consolidated report that we can pass on to our 360-degree database here. Okay. Next up, we have insurance summary, which basically is showing us the insurance premium averages, insurance exposure, and insurance premiums for the industry at large. Now, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is really going to be helpful when it comes to fine-tuning premiums and identifying huge discrepancies between how GuardDrive handles their premium policies and how the industry at large does. I mentioned that they're losing out a lot of business to competitors, and a lot of that is because of sensitive pricing policies. Data sets like these, external data sets like these, are really going to help create that sort of fine-tuning. Finally, we're going to move on to an API. So when you talk about APIs, you're generally talking about the real-time inputs. And over here, we've got an API from the National Highway Safety Association that basically returns values on the safety rating of a car based on its year, make, and model. And ratings go from 5 to most safe to 1 to least safe. As you can imagine, this is great information for any insurance company to have at hand rather than through a sort of static report. If they can update it dynamically, that's really helpful for them to make decisions on the fly when it comes to things like setting insurance premiums in a self-service model. So let's go ahead and look at how we created this API. The HTTP method was get. We just wanted to retrieve data from the National Highway Association there. We've entered in their base URL, the website where the National Highway Association hosts that API. We've applied the inputs that we're going to be putting into the API here. It's at year, at make, and at model. The at sign denotes the inputs. If the API requires some sort of authentication, it's password protected, then you can use this authentication drop down here to do that. If not, then we can move on since we're using a public API. Let's move on here. Right. Next up, you basically need to define the layout for the output text. You can do that using either a sample, as we've done here, or you can use a schema, XSD, run request. And you can also denote the output format of the layout. That's JSON, is what we've selected here. And finally, a couple of other things to wrap up. So how long to wait between timeouts when a request is made and it doesn't answer. We selected a duration of 10,000 seconds. How many times to retry if the connection fails the first time around. How long to wait between retries. All these things can be set in the layout builder. It's very intuitive, easy to use to build those API connections. And finally, the degree of parallelism here. So if you have a high volume of API requests that you're trying to make and you're processing them sequentially, that can really take away from the real-time aspect of real-time decision making. So you can implement the degree of parallelism there to create those GET requests in a far quicker manner. Okay, so we fed in the inputs from our auto insurance claims source. See the mapping there. Flattened out the data here using this expression and fed that into our Customer 360 database. So that's all of the input data that we're going to be using to build our Customer 360 view. There's two other aspects to this, which I touched upon in the slideshow portion of the webinar. The first is orchestrating all of these data flows to run. So to create that orchestration, Astera Enterprise uses something called workflows. Basically, they denote when workflows are run, whether they're sequential, whether they're run in parallel. As you can see here, we've brought in our external data first, so the vehicle data flow and the damage data flow that I talked about. Then our internal data sets are next up. So the claims database, the marketing the claims data flow, the insurance marketing summary, and the risk information. And then finally, the safety and rating API, which is dependent on the claims info is run last. A mail is sent to a relevant decision maker if all the data flows are orchestrated and run successfully. And finally, once all the input files are moved to our final database, they are deleted at the source so that we don't get duplications when new updates come in. All of these tasks are scheduled through our job scheduler, which you can see here. We set the frequency for updates based on when file is dropped in the watch folder, which we've defined here. So every time a new file is dropped in that watch folder, this workflow is going to run. You can also set based on time intervals, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. It really depends on how your workflows are set up, how your data flows are set up, how information is coming into your organization, and how you want to perform the reporting and analysis. So speaking of reporting and analysis, we've covered the collection, validation, aggregation of data. Let's take a brief look at what the reporting and analytics portion of this data pipeline would look like. So I mentioned before, Astera Enterprise hosts native connectors for Power BI and Tableau. So we've used Power BI here to create some reports based on the input data. Nothing too complex, but just some of the comparisons that I talked about here. So let's start here with average premium and policy annual premium by state. So as you can see, the industry metrics, the industry data that we had here shows lower policy premiums across the board in each of the states that we collected data from, whereas GuardDrive's internal policy premiums much higher across the board. Now, of course, isolated data set, but it really lets us know where GuardDrive's failings are occurring. With just a very small amount of input data and a report form, you can start to see, okay, there needs to be some adjustments made here. Second up, we talked about this earlier, whether accidents are occurring more in older vehicles versus newer vehicles. We created a simple comparison here to compare our internal data against state and nationwide data. Not enough volume here to really create any sort of trend, but you can see what that report would look like once we export the data into our endpoints. And finally, we're comparing insured education level against a month since last delinquency. Shows here that college students are lowest on the delinquency list, whereas those with a high school degree are actually second list. So I'm not sure if these statistics or metrics hold up to scrutiny, but once more volume data comes in, I'm sure some trends will start to appear. Okay, so that's, as far as the end-to-end use case goes, that's pretty much everything. Let me go ahead and switch back to our slides so that we can start to examine the outcomes. So when it comes to outcomes, how does GuardDrive benefit from this 360 view? A lot of ways. But let's start talking about how GuardDrive is no longer reliant on manual entry to transfer data from mainframe to endpoint applications. They no longer require dedicated resources for COBOL programming related tasks. Internal systems can be integrated and accessed in a single database by users at every level. External data can be easily integrated from a variety of sources, be it flat files, databases, APIs, or unstructured documents. GuardDrive's underwriting department now has a wealth of data to call upon to create far more sensitive pricing policies that are suited to a variety of market segments, from families and single adults to corporate buyers. These insights can drive self-service offerings that will adapt to customer requirements, so keeping up with the Joneses is there. All data is set up to Astera's job scheduling tools and workflows, so Customer 360 will be adapted dynamically as sources are refreshed. GuardDrive can now undertake their digital transformation on their own terms. That's so important. The rip and replace that we talked about, that doesn't need to be forced through, without worrying about sinking millions of dollars and decades into a wholesale hardware upgrade. Astera accomplishes the job for them, in other words. GuardDrive can create tailored marketing campaigns for segments based on their value. For example, insights may reveal that educated married drivers get into less accidents each year than single uneducated drivers. This informs subsequent marketing. Similarly, certain states may have a much higher rate of incidents, so any online campaigns running in these localities can be scaled back. We talked a bit about Apple and Netflix before and how they are, hyper-focused on user personalization. This is just a taste of the kind of things that they can do with a 360 view. Incident reports can be correlated in real time against credit risk info and claim histories to reveal whether certain claims are at risk of fraud. And the aforementioned insights can greatly improve lead generation and, by extension, sales, as agents will no longer be forced to chase bad quality leads with incorrect messaging. Instead, primed market segments will be led directly to them. So again, if you're having a lot of trouble on the sales end right now, 360 view is there for you. High payouts and unattractive premium policies can also be minimized wherever possible due to GuardDrive's new price-sensitive product offerings. So that's our end-to-end use case for this webinar. Now, I know there are many aspects of the Customer 360 that we didn't manage to touch on in depth, and some other awesome product features that we didn't get a chance to show off at all, but I hope we did manage to demonstrate the value that the 360 data architecture can bring to your organization in marketing, sales, strategic planning, logistics, and many other areas. And also how easy it is to set up and maintain this view with a data integration solution that can help automate collection, validation, matching, and consolidation of your data. Remember, you don't need to spend decades replacing and upgrading your infrastructure to see these results. Now, with that said, I'm sure our audience will have questions of their own to ask, so I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to Jay for the Q&A. Okay? Let me go ahead and get some questions for you. There's a bunch here. Let me start with this one. Does it produce hard code, or does it leverage dynamic binding like many iPaaS solutions? Hello, Jay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. I'll go ahead and repeat that question one more time. Does it produce hard code, or does it leverage dynamic binding like many iPaaS solutions?
Good question. So our product falls into the category of what is called metadata and engine-based solutions. So in the UI, with the drag and drop interface, the user creates the metadata of the solution, and that is sent to the engine, and engine knows how to run the job based on that information. So we do not generate any code anywhere. So that's basically going to the part of the question about do we generate any code. Now coming to the second part, that is about the similarity with the iPaaS platform. So basically, as I described, once the metadata is generated, it's basically an XML document, if you will. And this is what is sent to the engine, and engine knows based on that information that is in the XML how to run your job. And a job could be a workflow, could be a data flow, could be any combination of those.
Awesome. Okay, so I've got another question here. Should companies move all their data from legacy architecture to the cloud, or should they use cloud separately? That's the question there.
Again, very interesting question, and we do get this question asked frequently. So both of them, they have their own place, at least at this point, and based on our experience with our customers, we have seen that the legacy systems, specifically if you're talking about mainframe, it's not that easy to move away from that. It still has a big role to play, and that is coexisting with other data storage systems. And sometimes we do see that the cloud data is there and the mainframe system is there, and they coexist with some kind of connection between them. So that's what we see most frequently. But also we have seen that sometimes the legacy systems are kind of being phased out, and the data is being moved to other platforms, and mostly to the cloud platforms. It depends on the nature of data as well. If the data is more transactional, how do you store it? What is the purpose of the storage if you want to do analysis on it? So if you are looking at data warehousing and analytics, in such cases, there are pretty good cloud solutions available now where you can move the data to clouds, for example, Snowflake, or if you're looking at Redshift. Such solutions basically are able to handle large volumes of data and at the same time provide very good interface for analytics. So yes, to summarize, we are seeing basically a combination. At this point, we cannot recommend that one way or another, that whether it should stay on mainframe or go to cloud directly. It will depend on the combination, and again, it will depend on the kind of data you're dealing with.
Perfect. Yeah, I think as with anything involving sort of best practices, there are recommendations, and you're very dependent on the type of models you're operating with, and as you mentioned, the type of architecture you have. Moving on to the next question we have here. It's how to integrate 360 integration so that you can get the most business value out of it. That's the question there, is how to integrate 360 data integration so that your business can get the most business value out of it.
So for this question, I believe, again, it's a question about architecture, like the way you design your solution, and also what exactly is the expected outcome. So going back to the example of what we saw in the webinar, the sample data that you had, the goal was clearly defined that we wanted to look at the customer's data, and we wanted to bring certain characteristics of data from different sources into one place. And from that perspective, we designed a solution where, let's say that we want to bring in data from the CRM system, the ERP system, and let's say the production database. So we are moving data from those different sources into one place. And the purpose is defined that now with the 360-degree view of your customer's data, this is what we want to do. We want to do predictive analytics, or we want to do some kind of pattern analysis. So depending on your objective, the architecture is basically heavily influenced by the objective. So yeah, so that's basically that's how. Again, it will depend on what exactly is the objective of your solution, and based on that, you can fit in the whole idea of 360-degree architecture into your solution, and you can connect different sources, different type of sources using a product. A product is basically a platform that gives you flexibility to kind of design your own solution. So you can basically, depending on your use case, you can bring in different kind of sources and bring it to one centralized place, and then downstream analytics and all that can be performed on that.
Okay. Next question here. What kind of API integration does Enterprise support? So we talked about API, I think, briefly in the webinar.
Sure. So in terms of APIs, we do support REST and SOAP. SOAP is not being used that frequently, but still we have connector for that. REST is basically where we see a lot of activity. Most of our actually customers, they are moving to REST even when they had SOAP in past. So SOAP and REST, we support both, and we support all the verbs. So basically get, put, post, delete. So basically any kind of activity, whether you want to read from using the API or you want to deposit data, update, and so on and so forth, all that is available. We are actually releasing OData as well. So OData is actually specific to the data exchange, and it's a flavor of REST. And we are coming up with its own connector that is going to be handling OData connectivity for all the API calls.
Okay, awesome. So we have some product updates to look forward to in the near future for those paying attention. The last question we have here, Jay, does Astera Enterprise support any sort of data governance or authorization features to control which users have access to that consolidated data in the 360 view?
So data governance, of course, is a much bigger umbrella. It covers a lot of things. We do cover a portion of it. So if you're looking at security of data and you want to define roles about who has access to what part of data, you can handle that using built-in security, and where you can go very granular about which, let's say, for example, you have published your data, and your data is published as different business entities. So, for example, there's a customer data, and then there is a data that is about, let's say, sales data, transactions data. So for each entity, you define who has access to it, what kind of role it has access to it, and role again can be assigned to individual users. So you can go granular, and you can assign access levels for people.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions that I see right now. So that wraps up our webinar and the Q&A portion. For everybody attending, thank you so much for paying attention throughout the webinar. We really value your feedback, your answers to questions, and we'll try and get you a new webinar as soon as possible, perhaps by the end of the month, another use case to present to you. Other than that, we've added a lot of content in the attachments you can see there. So if you want to find out about any of the features or maybe try out the product itself, you can go ahead and do that by clicking any of those attachments. Other than that, we have more great content coming up, so please go to astera.com to view that. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you.